Okay, so we are recording. So as I said, this class is searching and editing in OCLC Connexion. The purpose of the class is to show you just the basics of using OCLC Connexion. It's very introductory level. We're not going into depth in anything. There are tutorials on the OCLC website that show you a lot of the things that we're going to be looking at today, plus more. If you're one of the people that is working toward being certified as a cataloger in SHARE, this is not one of the required classes, but we just wanted to kind of give you like an overview of OCLC Connexion and have the chance to do a little bit of hands-on. You know, we used to do this class in person, so we did a lot of hands-on. Not so easy now that we're doing it in an online environment, but hopefully you'll be able to get a little bit of practice and be able to ask questions if you want. Those of you who are working toward being certified as a cataloger in SHARE, there are several modules that on OCLC that you will need to take. So a lot of what we're doing in the class today, you'll also be seeing in those modules, but the modules will show you a little bit more. So those of you that maybe are just taking this class as a refresher, or you've actually been in Connexion and been using it a little, and maybe there are some of you that have never used Connexion at all. So if there are those of you that have used it, if you've got some tips or tricks that you feel work really well for you when we're talking about searching or customizing, then feel free to share those. You know, everybody kind of gets into the little groove of doing things the way that works best for them or the way that they were taught. But sometimes other people, you know, have other tips that work well, and maybe we just don't know about them. So the class is going to be in 3 parts. The first part is just looking at that opening screen and some of the customization that you can do, some of the settings, some of the things that you can set up the way that you would like. Then after that, we'll take a short break. Then we'll look at some searching. And the last part will be editing, and hopefully there'll be some time for a little break between searching and editing. So the third part will be editing. So I am going to turn off my camera and share my screen. So now you should be seeing my desktop, and I'm going to open up OCLC using this icon. And I have to pull it up. So this is your opening screen. So there are things that you can do here. We're going to look at some of the settings. We're going to look at some of the icons. We're going to look at some of the menus and looking at some of the ways that you can customize. Even before you've logged in. You know, we're not even logged in yet, but there's a lot we can do right here on this opening screen. So, you know, like a lot of or most Windows programs, we have a menu bar up here along the top. So you click on the menu name and it gives you the drop down of different things that you can do under that menu. So under the cataloging, this is where you can click to bring up ways to do searching, either in Connexion or in a save file. This is also where if you're going to create a new original record completely from scratch, you can come here to create single record and it brings up your work form. Authorities is kind of the same thing. This is where you can bring up a search box to search the authority file. If you're going through the series of classes for SHARE cataloging, then you know we are doing a class on Introduction to Authority Records, and you'll learn a lot about the authority file in that class. Under the edit and action menus, these all give you various functions that you can do when you have a bibliographic record open. When you have a record open and you can do these actions, then they'll be highlighted. Otherwise, they're grayed out right now. Batch, we're not going to look at. We don't do any batch searching or batch loading. Under the View menu, if you look at, we're not going to go through every single one here, but down here to OCLC fixed fields, this is where you can set where on the bibliographic record you would like to see the fixed fields. It defaults to having the fixed fields open at the top of the record, but if you would like them better at the bottom, you can change that. You can also display as a variable field, meaning that you can have it collapsed into one mark field instead of opened, expanded the way that you see it in the default. We've got status bar checked here, and that just means we have this status bar on the bottom of the screen open, and when we do various actions, you'll see things pop up down here. You don't have to have that on your screen if you don't want to. You can uncheck that. Under toolbars, I've got 3 toolbars checked. So one is the client toolbar, which is your row of icons. One is the quick search toolbar, which is kind of hidden behind, well, right here behind my drop down. And we will be looking at that. It's a way to do, a place to do some searches without even opening the search box. And then the quick tools, which is your text strings and your user tools over here. So you can have any or all or none of these toolbars open on your screen. That's completely up to you. So just check or uncheck which ones you would like to see and which ones you don't need. Over here on your, so this is your client toolbar. These are the various icons. When an option or an action is available, the icons will be highlighted. Otherwise, right now they're grayed out. You can, there's this little arrow right here on the end. If you would like to see your icons on 2 rows instead of 1, you can change that. The next menu here is tools. There's a lot to look at there, so we're going to come back to that one. Window is just a way to view records side by side or horizontally, one above the other, or cascaded. So we will look at how to view records side by side a little bit later. Under the help menu, there's actually quite a bit here. First of all, if you go to help and then down to about OCLC Connexion client, this shows you, and just on this general tab right here at the top, it shows you the version of OCLC Connexion that you're on. Everybody that's got OCLC should have 2.63 now. That's the most recent version, and I don't think the other ones are being supported. There is a new version of Connexion coming out sometime in the summer, which is Connexion 3.0. So that one, excuse me, that one you do need to have Windows 10 in order to load that 3.0, and that's coming in the summer. I see in the chat, Shannon says, my OCLC connection looks nothing like your screen. Shannon, are you maybe using the browser and not the web version, the downloaded web version? I mean, without looking at your screen, I don't really know, but that's my guess.
I'm not sure. I don't know what it is, but mine has more of a, I don't know, it's more of a compact thing. The bars are not all the way running, the icons are not running all the way across the top. So I will go back and look.
Well, maybe during the break or after the class, I can, we can get on and share our screens and I can see what you're seeing and maybe see what you've got. Right now, my only guess is that you're using the browser and not the web client, but without seeing it, it's really hard to tell. So maybe we can look at it together after the class.
Sounds good.
Okay. So also under this help menu, if you look down here, there is also tutorials, this, if you click on this, it goes to the OCLC website with that kind of their training portal where they have all their tutorials listed. I'm not going to go there because I tried it yesterday and it took a really long time to load, so I don't want to take the time to bring it up. Down here under useful web links, it's quite a bit here. If you look at client documentation, this goes to the OCLC website where you can see various helpful documents about connection. It's a little bit convoluted to get to. It opens to this screen, but to get to the actual documentation, I had to click on Librarian's Toolbox. And then, to find my notes. Cataloging documentation under cataloging tools. And then the client docs where, so under here, don't click on this one, but under here where it says how to use the Windows-based interface, click on where it says getting started. And then connection client documentation, and then it gets you down to all of the various things. So there's a setup worksheet here. So the things that I am showing you today about how to customize, all that's in this setup worksheet. So, you don't have to take a lot of notes. You can come and download this. There's the cataloging client quick reference, which we also gave you as a handout in L2. And various other links to things that might be helpful. Function key template. So if you don't like a lot of mouse clicking, you like function keys better than a lot of mouse clicking, then you can download this template that gives you some of the function keys. So just like other Windows programs, Connection gives you more than one way of doing things. So, and function keys is one of those. All right, let's look at back to help and useful web links. Shannon, this is a downloaded version. So the question was, did you download it or did you go to a website to pull it up? This is downloaded, and there is a place on the OCLC website to get the download.
I don't think I downloaded it.
Oh, so you might be looking at it on the browser version.
Okay.
Okay, so some other things under these useful web links, bibliographic formats and standards. This is Cataloger's best friend. This is, it just lays out all of the MARC fields, and for each field, it gives a little entry about that field where it tells you what indicators are valid for that field. It tells you what subfields are valid for that field. It gives you some great examples under indicators and under the subfields. So this is something you'll probably be using a lot. I know I probably get into it every day. So it's a very, very good resource for everything about MARC coding. And also some actual cataloging guidelines as well, not just smart coding. All right, something else under the help. There are various forms here. So if you find a duplicate record, 2 duplicate records, you can fill out a form to let OCLC know that you've got a couple records you think are duplicates. You can, if you find a record that just has an obvious typo, you can put in a form to ask them to correct that record. Another thing you can do is come down here to OCLC system alerts. So this is where if you're having a problem with connection and you don't know whether it's on your end or on OCLC's end, if you come to that system alerts, and then you have to click on this system status dashboard. And it's taken a little bit of load, and so this is going to show us a list of all of the OCLC services, and Connexion is just one of those. So here's Connexion. Everything looks good as of yesterday and today. All systems go. If there was a problem, then you would see a notice here. So if you are having problems with connection, it's a good place to come to check to see whether it's a connection problem or whether it's something on might be something with your computer or your internet connection or something like that. This merge menu, you probably won't see this in your authorization. This is something we've just done some training here. Some system staff and CMC staff have done some training to be able to merge records in OCLC. So after we've been through the training, we get that permission in our authorizations, and that's when that shows up on this menu bar. So you probably won't see this in yours unless you've part of that training as well. All right, so let's go back to tools. There's quite a bit to look at here. So first of all, I want to look at this. I'm not going to look at every single thing, but I am going to look first at this toolbar editor. I have to pull that up. This is a way to add or take away icons from your client toolbar up here. So let's say I want to add this icon for exporting. So I just click on it and I drag it up and I find the spot on the toolbar where I want it to be, and then I just drop it in. And then if I decide that I don't like that, I don't use that icon, I want to declutter all these icons that I have on my toolbar, and I decide maybe I don't really use this one that much, so I don't need it anymore. And I just click it and drag it back down. And that takes it off of my toolbar. So then if I go back to tools, and we're going to look at options. So this brings up several tabs. We're not going to look at every single tab, just some of the ones that you might use. So the first one is this authorizations tab. I have several authorizations that I can use depending on what account I need to be in, but probably you're only going to have one, but not necessarily. You may have more than one. So you can fill in the authorizations here. You just want to click the radio button next to whatever one authorization you want to use as your default, so that when you log into OCLC, it's going to automatically log into that authorization so that you don't have to choose it every time. So whatever one, if you've only got the one, click this radio button under default, and that's the one that's going to come up every time that you log in. Batch we're not going to look at. Classify is a function in OCLC that helps you, if you don't know a Dewey number, it gives you a way to look for Dewey numbers that other libraries have used in records of the same type. You just want to make sure that's set to whatever type of classification your library uses. The majority of share libraries are Dewey libraries, so you just want to make sure that that radio button for Dewey is checked. And then under where it says 3-digit tag for the variable field to create, if you use that classify function and it finds a record or it finds a Dewey number and you want to add that to your record, this is where you're telling it what field to put it in. So you want that to be an 092. That's the field for a Dewey number that's put in by an organization other than a national library. Under the Derive Record tab. So deriving is a way of creating a new original record by copying an existing record. So in the Derive Record, this tab, you can set up when you derive a new record from an existing record, what MARC tags do you want to transfer over from the existing record into the new record. So you see we've got quite a few checked here. And that, again, you can check or uncheck whatever fields you would like to transfer over or not transfer over. Export tab, we will come back to that in a minute. This is where you set up the path to export records out of OCLC. But we'll come back to that in just a minute. Under fonts, this lets you set the font size for the display of records, when you get a results list, or if you print that list, what font size do you want that list to print in? Same thing with your records. What font size do you want the records to display? What font size do you want them to print? Same thing with your results lists. Under the General tab, a few things you can do here. If you go down to this button that says Startup Options, this is where you can set that for Connexion to immediately run a particular function or run a macro the minute that you log in, as soon as you log in. So I don't have it set to do that, but what I could do is if I go to Start a Client function and set it for log on and search WorldCat, so that the minute I log in, it's going to automatically bring up a box to search Connexion or search WorldCat. Lots of different things you can do here. So that's up to you. I usually leave that at none, but again, everybody gets used to doing things a certain way. So whatever, when you start working in Connexion regularly and whatever your workflow is the best for you, that's what you do. We're not going to look at international or my status. If we look at printing, this just takes you to your network, to your printer for you to print lists or records. If we look at the tab that says RDA, you want to make sure that this checkbox for use RDA work forms when creating new bibliographic records, you want to make sure that one is checked. If you haven't, also if you have a subscription to the RDA toolkit, then you can click this radio button and fill in your username and password, and then you'll be able to get right into the RDA toolkit from Connexion. So use RDA work forms when creating new authority records. You don't need to have that checked. There are some of us here at the system that can create authority records, so we do use RDA work forms for that. So just a note that all records now coming into the Polaris database must be full level RDA. So whether that's a new original record that you create, or an original record that or an existing record that you edit, anything that comes into Polaris needs to be RDA. So if you're going to be creating new original records, you want to make sure that you have this checkbox checked so that it pulls up the work form to do an RDA record. Under record display, this is just where you can set the color of the background and the color of the print for your records. Down here under fields, you can check this box. It says view all field data. You can also check this box. It says use drop downs for fixed fields. And what that does is when we get into bibliographic records and we're looking at the fixed fields up at the top, it will give you, each field will give you a little drop down arrow that will drop down a menu of the list of the codes that are valid for that field. They don't tell you what the codes mean. They just give you a list of the codes. So, that again, that's up to you if you would like that or not. Under spelling, you can customize here what fields you want spell check to check. So you can set that by fields and subfields. You can have it skip certain subfields because it's always going to find, maybe it'll be a lot of proper names, so it's always going to find errors. So you can have it skip particular fields. So here's where you can customize what fields you want to be included in a spell check, but you can omit certain fields from that or certain subfields from that spell check. And then there's just general options for spell checker. Under toolbar, really the only thing you can do here is change the size of the icons on your toolbar, either standard or large. All right, so we're not going to look at the Z3950. We're not .50. We're not using that. So I'm going to go back to this export tab. So this is where, when you get to the point where you've been editing records in OCLC and you're going to export them, then this is where you set up the path to do that. So we did give you a handout about how to do that, but I'll just walk through it really quick. We aren't going to be exporting any records in this class, and this is not to show you how to bring records into Polaris. This is only how to set up a pathway to get records out of Connexion. So we recommend that you use a flash drive to export your records. It makes it a lot easier when you're getting them to find them, to get them into Polaris. Or if you use Mark Report, it's a way to, an easy way to get them onto a flash drive or onto a file that you can then pull up and do your checking in Mark Report for those of you that have Mark Report. So assuming that I'm going to use a flash drive, if I click on Create, and my export destination is a file, so that defaults. So I'll leave that radio button checked and I say OK. Then I have a flash drive in and it's looking at my flash drive, which is drive D in my case, might not necessarily be that on your computer. And then I just give my file a name. And I say, and you can call it whatever you like. The type of file is a export data file. You have this .dat extension on it. I say open. I can give my export session a name. I don't have to, I'm just leaving this path. And I say, okay. So now now I have a choice here of export sessions. If this is the one that I'm going to use, I need to make sure that one's highlighted. And then I click apply. So now my pathway to export records out of Connexion has been set up, and we're ready to go. Again, we're not going to be exporting anything in this class. We're not going to be bringing records into Polaris. So this is just how to get it set up for at such time as you have been working in Connexion and you're ready to start, or you're in the review process where somebody here at Share is looking at your records. This is a way to get them out of Connexion to send to us to review. All right, so that's really all I was going to show in the way of customizing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute just to see, does anybody have any questions about that customizing? There's a lot of different things you can do, and I certainly am not an expert on it, but there is a place on OCLC to get that setup worksheet, and that tells you a lot of different things. Okay, so that's all I was going to show with customization, and it's only 9:30. So I think we will, rather than take a break now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and get back into OCLC, and we'll start a little bit on the searching, and then maybe at around 10 or so we'll take a break. So I'm going to share that again. Okay, are you seeing my OCLC screen?
Yes.
Okay. So to do searching, we're going to look at some different places that you can do searching in Connexion and different ways that you can do searching in Connexion. The first one is just this quick search bar on your opening screen if you have it. If you've got this screen enabled, then or this toolbar enabled, I'm sorry, for searching, then this is a good place. It's a really good place if you just want to start a search with an ISBN. You can just scan in an ISBN from here. You can type it in, you can type it with dashes, without the dashes or spaces if you're typing, but if you have a scanner, you can scan it. And you don't have to do anything but put in the ISBN. So I'm going to type that in since I don't have a scanner hooked up. So then when I do that, because we haven't logged in yet, before it will do my search, it's going to ask me to log in. So it brings up my login screen. This was the authorization that I set as my default. So I just say okay. It also brings up this message of the day, and supposedly they were going to stop showing the message of the day as of the 1st of March, but they still seem to be. So we just close that. And now it will do my search. So there's a lot of things you can do without being logged in, but in order to actually do a search, we do have to log in. So it just pulls up one record that matches my OCLC or my ISBN that I searched. Another quick and easy thing you can do here on this quick search bar is to do a search for an OCLC number. If you've got an OCLC record number and you want to look at just that record, then you can do that from this quick search bar. With an ISBN, you don't have to put anything in but the ISBN. With anything else that you do from this search bar, you have to put in some sort of a prefix. For OCLC numbers, there are 3 different prefixes that you can use. You can use an asterisk, you can use the hash mark, or you can use NO colon. I'm going to use the NO colon. NO colon is an index label for OCLC number. So I put in, so again, there's 3 different ones you can use. I'm just using this, the index label. And that pulls up just the one record that I wanted to look at. Again, there's 3 different ways you can do that. Whatever, I often use the asterisk as my prefix, but there's 3 different ones you can use. You can also search from here using any of the index labels, and I'll show you in a minute what the index labels are. So that's one way. So this quick search box is just scan in an ISBN and go, or type in an OCLC number. So I'm going to close this record and go back to my screen. But to bring up the full search box, there's 3 different ways I can do that. I can go up here to cataloging and then search WorldCat. Or I can use this icon if I have it on my client toolbar, or if I like function keys, I don't like a lot of mouse clicking, I can use function key F2. Any one of those will work. So let's open that. And if you go to there and you have not logged in, it will take you through that login process like what we showed before. So it brings up our search, WorldCat, and this is split into 2 parts. This part up here is the command line. This works exactly like this quick search toolbar up here. This is a good place to just scan in an OCLC number, or scan in an ISBN, sorry, or put in an OCLC number, but you have to use one of those 3 prefixes. So again, it's a good place to just do some quick searching. You can also do any search here using an index label. So if you see down here in this part of the screen, after each one of these indexes, it has in parentheses, in this case, IN colon. Up here it has TI equal sign, PB colon here. Those are all index labels. So that takes you to, it searches that particular index. So if I wanted to do a title search, and the index label for title is TI colon. So if I wanted to do a search, and then I just hit enter here. So that brings up a list of records that meet my search criteria for a title of Shadow Recruit. So, oops. So you'll notice that I did my search up here, but I had information down here. Doesn't really matter. Wherever my cursor is highlighted, that's where it's going to do the search, regardless of what is in any other spot. So that's a command line search, good for searching ISBN, good for searching OCLC record numbers. If you have used Connexion before, before it was Connexion, it was called Passport, and we did derived searches. If you know how to do derived searches, you can do those here as well. So the other part of this search box is this numeric or keyword/numeric searches. So this is a way of searching that lets you put a lot of different limits on your searches to narrow them down. So I had some searches in here that I was working on yesterday. I'm going to click my clear search button down here to wipe that out. But I also am going to uncheck this box. So each one of these boxes is a place where you can put in a search term. And then if you look at this drop-down menu over here, then these are all of the choices that you have of indexes to search in. So you can combine lots of different searches here. So this is a really long list of indexes. If I didn't want to see, so each one of these boxes has the same list of indexes. If I don't want to see this big long list, if I click this little box up here with the minus sign, it says show fewer indexes. So if I click that, now if I click my drop-down menu, now it just gives me a much shorter list of indexes. And I can actually customize this list a little bit. If I click this little box that looks like a pencil in it. So customize short list of indexes. So this is what I have in my list right now. If I go to modify, then I can check any one of these checkboxes to add that particular index to my short list. So if I wanted to add genre, and then I click OK. So now genre has been added to my list. And then I can also, if I want this list to show up in a different order, I can click on something and click on move up or move down. If there's something I don't use anymore, then I can click on it and click remove, and then that will take that out of my list. So you can customize here. This is a way that you can do some Boolean searching. There's also places down here where you can do some customization. So under this language list, this gives me a huge long list of languages. If I were looking for a work in a particular language, then I can come here and find that language. If I don't want to see that entire list, I can click on the minus sign. And now I have a much shorter list, but this doesn't allow me to customize. So if I shorten my list, these are my choices. So if I want to see the whole list again, then I click that. Here's a place where we can narrow by format of material, and we will do some of that. Here's where we can specify that we want something that's internet or not internet. Under source, we have two choices, any or DLC. Any means any organization that puts in OCLC records. When I do my search, it will bring up anything that matches my criteria. If I narrow this down to DLC, this is only going to find records that were put in by the Library of Congress. DLC is the Library of Congress's OCLC symbol. It's only going to find records that were put in by DLC or by one of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging Partners for DLC. Their records are also considered national level. So usually I leave that at any, but sometimes there might be a time when you would only want to look for DLC records. whether I want microform or not. I can put in, if I'm looking for a particular publication date or range of publication dates, I can fill in things here. Under material type, again, I can get a really long list. And this is another place where I can shorten that list down a little bit. And I can customize. So if I want to add a material type to my customized short list, then I just click the checkbox and I add that to my list. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it. Down here under Apply Language of Cataloging Limiter, we are going to look at that. Under search results, you want to always make sure that you uncheck this box that says display using Glimmer clustering. So Glimmer clustering just means it will bring back records of any language of cataloging in your results. And if you have that box checked, you'll often get some really, either you won't get the results, won't get any results at all, or you'll just get some very odd ones. So you just want to make sure that this box is unchecked. Enter diacritics just gives you a table. If in your search term you need to put in some diacritics, then this lets you do that. Expand or collapse, excuse me, just means that if the only thing you want to see is this command line, you don't need the big keyword numeric, then it will just give you the command line. If you're good at doing derived searches, then maybe that's all you need. All right, we're going to do a little bit of searching. We're going to search for the movie with the title Sleeper by Woody Allen. We're only looking for videos. We're only looking for DVDs. So we're going to put some things in our search terms here. So the title I'm searching for is Sleeper. And I'm going to change this from title phrase to title. Either one of those works. But I usually start it with title. Then I want to also, if I just did a title search for Sleeper, it's going to give me hundreds of records. So I want to narrow that down a little bit. So I've got my Boolean searches here. I'm going to say I want a title of Sleeper, and this record needs to have the name in it of Alan. So I'm going to choose personal name. But I want to exclude, I don't want anything that was, any DVD that was published by MGM. So here's a place where I can exclude things from my search. So I have these Boolean operators available. So this time I'm going to say not MGM. I can also narrow this down. Let's say I only want videos. So I'm going to say visual material, and I only want DVDs. So under my material type, I can choose DVD. So I've got a lot of search terms here. If I thought that I might have to come back and refine this search a little bit, maybe it's not gonna, maybe I'm not sure what all I need to search by, I can click this box that says retain search. So then if I have to come back and modify this search, it's going to have all of this in here, and I can just come in and change what I need to change. But let's see what we get. So we get a list of 13 records. So they all have the title of Sleeper in them somewhere. They have Woody Allen's name in there somewhere. And here's our publishers. I excluded MGM, but it gave me Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer because that was spelled out in the record, and I didn't exclude that. But it gave me 20th Century Fox. It gave me some people that don't have publishers, which is a little bit of a problem, but we would have to look at those records to see. So that's one way you can do a lot of limiting in your searches. So I'm going to pull up my search box again. This time I'm going to use the icon. So I had that retain search box checked. So All of this is still in here. If I want to go back to clear out my boxes, I just hit clear search. So you'll notice it's still got the retain search box checked. So I'm going to uncheck that this time. And it still has my Boolean operators. So you have to be careful if you put something in not or, you know, you may not get the results that you want. So you want to make sure when you come back and get started on a brand new search that you know, get everything set back. So I'm going to show you what happens when I uncheck this box for apply language of cataloging limiter. So language of cataloging is not talking about the language of the piece that's being cataloged. It's talking about the language of the organization that's putting the record into OCLC. So I'm going to do a search for Cat in the Hat. And I want to narrow it down to Dr. Seuss. So I'm going to put his name in there. I don't care about the publisher. I do just want books. And in this case, I'm just going to search for books with a publication date in the range of 2008 to 2011. And so I can either click OK to do my search, or I can hit enter. Either one works. So I'm going to click OK. So I've got 24 records down here on my status bar. It tells me how many records I have. But if you notice here, most of these have a language of cataloging of English. But if I look down here, I've got, this one has got a language of cataloging of German. And you can tell the language of cataloging up in the 040 field in the subfield B. So that means even though the piece that's being cataloged is in English, the language of cataloging, the language of the organization that put this record in, is German. You can hover over these OCLC codes in the 040. This one didn't go to anything, but it will tell you the organization that put the record in. Doesn't necessarily help you, but it's just some kind of interesting sometimes. So one way I can tell that this language of cataloging is German is if I look in this 300, instead of pages, it has Seiten. Instead of illustrations, it has, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. And down here in my 336 and 337 and 338, instead of text and unmediated and volume, it's got the German. It's got some parts in English because the piece that they're cataloging is in English, but the organization itself is that put the record in, their language is German. So you don't want to get that in your results. So I'm going to go back, and I don't necessarily have to close out all the way back to my original screen. I can just hit my F2 again and pull up my search screen right here. So I'm going to do the search again, but this time I want to do this apply language of cataloging limiter, and I only want language of cataloging of English. So I have to put my search terms in again. If you see this little drop-down menu, OCLC will show you the last, oh, that's why it didn't work the first time. Didn't give me as many records as I thought because I didn't have in. Let me show you, let me do it again and show you the records that I got last time when I checked this. So again, the OCLC will show you your last 10 searches. So if I've got my cat in the hat, and down here, if I just hit my down arrow, it brings up my searches, my last search, and I can just keep going down, and it shows me my last 10. Under format, I want books. Under date of publication, I want a range. You could just put one date in there. Okay, that's much more like what I thought I was getting when I did this yesterday. So we've got ones with language of cataloging English, but we also have Slovakian, we have Spanish, we have Swedish, we have Danish, we have Dutch, So we have lots of records that we don't need to see. And sometimes these language of cataloging, it will look really, really close to English language of cataloging and might be easy to mistake and bring a record in. But we only want language of cataloging, English language of cataloging records in our database. So I'm going to go back and do the search again. So I'm going to use my down arrow and get my cat in the hat. I could have clicked my retain search. Either one of those works. I go down here and do my find Dr. Seuss, do my format and my range of dates. This time, I want my apply language of cataloging limiter, and I want to make sure it's set to English. And I say, okay. So now I'm down to 60 records with language of cataloging English. So you'll notice that the language of the piece is not necessarily English. So this is Cat in the Hat in Chinese, but the record was done by an organization with English language of cataloging. So in that 040, it says English. So here's a place where I can customize what I see in my results list. So to do that, I can go to, I right click anywhere on this screen. I go to list settings. And here's all my columns. So since I've got my language of cataloging limiter on, every record that I bring back is going to be English language of cataloging. So I don't really need this column. I don't need to see. So I'm just going to uncheck that and say, okay. And now it's gone. I can resize these column headers. I can move them in different places so that they show up in a different order. So you can do a lot of customization here. You'll notice this column that says L. Most of the time in this result set it's blank, but every once in a while you'll see an initial in here. If you see a D, that means this record was put in by the Library of Congress or one of its PCC partners. And if you opened it, you would see that DLC in the 040. So anytime there's an initial in here, that means a national level library put this record in. So this might be the British National Library. You could also see them put in by the Library and Archives Canada. So sometimes you'll see that initial in here. So just anytime you see this L and it's got something in that column, that means a national level library put that record in. I'm going to do one more search and then I think we'll take a break. So I'm going to go back. And again, you don't have to close all the way back to this screen every time. You can bring up your search box anytime. So I'm going to hit my F2. This time I'm going to do, just to show you that you want to be careful not to narrow too much. So I'm going to do a search for a title, look homeward. Angel. And this is by Thomas Wolfe, so I'm going to put that name in there. And I just want ones by a particular publisher. So I'm going to say Scribner. So you can do these in any order. You don't always have to do the title and then the name and then the publisher. You can, have these first two boxes blank and put your search down here in the bottom one. It doesn't matter. You can use any index in any of these boxes. I'm going to narrow this to books, I guess. And I'm going to do this retain search because I may need to come back and look at this again. So I'm going to say okay. So it brought 10 records and all of them have Charles Scribner in the publisher. But I don't see the one that matches what I have. So I'm going to bring that search box up again. And instead of Charles Scribner, I'm just going to say Scribner. And I'm going to try it again. So that brings me a lot more records. Just to show you that, well, first of all, under the older set of rules, AACR, their guideline was to shorten down the name of a publisher. As long as you could still recognize what publisher it was, you could shorten down the name of the publisher. So instead of putting in Charles Scribner or Charles Scribner's Sons, then a lot of catalogers under the older set of rules would have just put in Scribner. So you want to be careful not to narrow down your searches too much. You want to leave them a little bit more general, at least to begin with. And then if you need to narrow it down a little bit more, you can do that. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. So before we do any more searching, I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions. You can either unmute and ask or put them in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. And if you think of a question over the break, we can look at that again when we come back. So it's 10:01. So it'll take about 5 minutes. So come back at 10:06. So see everybody back in 5 minutes. There was one, there's a question in the chat. Where was it that you could modify your record search results? Amanda, do you mean where could I modify the columns that I see in the record? Okay, I'll show you that. Let me get back into OCLC. So it's right here. When you get your search results screen, if you right click and you go to list settings, and then these are your choices. You can check or uncheck these boxes, and then you can either move up or move down. I think moves them right or left, basically. Is that what you were looking for? You're welcome. So it's this right click and then list settings. And you can also, resize these columns, and you can click on these column headers to sort. So a lot of different things you can do here. Okay, so we are going to move on and do a little bit more searching. So I had my retain search box. I'm going to uncheck that and go to clear out everything. So just a few of the other indexes that are available for searches. So, up here in the command line, you can scan in or type in an ISBN, but you can do that down here too. So ISBN is one of your choices. I have the short list on, but if I opened it, so I open up this list, I have a whole bunch of choices, and you can just type the first letter of the first word of whatever index you're looking for. So if I type the K, that brings up the keyword index, or I can find it in my drop-down menu. But I can search ISBN here. I just have to find it, and then I can scan it or type it here. Again, I could put my search term in any one of these boxes and use any one of these indexes. There's not really an order of how you have to put them in. You can search ISSNs if you have a serial that you're looking for. And I change that to ISSN. And then click OK. So that brings me up to all of these records that have that ISSN in them. I can do another, like if you have sound recordings and you want to look up by the publisher's number, which is a really good search term for sound recordings, especially classical. So I can put it down here if I want, doesn't really matter. So that's my, but now I'm looking, instead of publisher, I want publisher number. And that's this MN is my index label. Click OK, and that brings me up all of my records that have that index label on them. Or, sorry, not the index label, that have that actual publisher's number in the record. So just a lot of different narrowing you can do, limiting you can do here. You can get pretty specific. All right, let's try some other searches. And look at our results. So I'm going to do a title search. And I'm going to put it in here just so you say it doesn't really matter what box you put it in or what order. Oops. And I'm searching for a title, so I just hit the T and that brings up that title index. And I say OK. I want to narrow this down a little bit. I'm going to try this again and narrow it down a little bit. Let's see, I'll look for my notes here. I want to narrow this down by date range. And if I just had one particular date I was looking for, I could put that in there as well. So this time I only came up with 4 records. So this is what's called a brief list. When you get anywhere between 1 to 5 or 2 to 5 records in your results, it's going to come up with this brief list where it shows you information from the record that you can kind of look at to see if one of these is one that you want to look at further. If I go back and do another search, let's see what I want to search by. Well, let me try that Citizen Dwayne again. And this time I'm not going to narrow it by anything. So now I came up with 11 records. So anything over 6, anything between 6 and 100 records, you're going to get what's called this truncated list. So you can't really see as much here. So it just depends on how many records come back in your list as to what you're going to, how you're going to see that results screen. All right, so let's try another search. This time I'm going to do a title. And if I just do this search, so because I came up with so many records, I came up with over 100 records, then Connexion will break this down first by material type, and then within material type by a range of dates. So there are some books that have that title in them. We've got some visual materials, which probably DVDs or videos. We've got some sound recordings. We've got some scores. We've got computer files. So we've got all these different types of material that have that title, Ella Enchanted, in them. So I think I need to refine this search a little bit. That's way too much. So I'm going to bring back that title, and I did that. My drop-down menu shows me the last 10 searches, so I can just hit my down arrow and find the one that I did. This time I want to narrow it down to sound recordings only. So I'm going to say OK. So now I have a list of just 66 records. So because we searched by title, the results list is sorted by title, but I could sort by clicking on any one of these column headers. So if I wanted to sort by publisher, I could do that. If I wanted to sort by the date, if I wanted to search by how many holdings or sort by how many holdings, I can do that too. So lots of different ways that you can sort here. So if I open up one of these records, and I look at this and I think, well, it's not really the right one for my what I have in my hand. So I want to look at the next record in the list. I can either just close this record, go back to the list, and then open up the next one. But the easier way is if you have this icon on your toolbar that says records and lists forward, it's got the little green arrow going to the right. If I click that, it moves me forward to the next record in the list. So before I was on record number 6 out of the 66 records. Now I'm on record number 7 out of the 66 records. So that will move you down in the list. If you like function keys, if you just hit function key F9, that moves me down to the next record in the list. So now I'm on the 8th record. So you don't have to keep closing the record and going back to the list every time. You can keep moving back and forth. If you decided, well, maybe that first record that I looked at really was the one, I better look at that one again, I can either click my arrow to go backwards if I have this icon on my toolbar. Now I'm back to the 7th, or I can do a Shift F9 on my keyboard, and that moves me back to number 6. So that's a way you can kind of move back and forward within a list without having to close and go back out to the main list again. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to bring up my search box again. This time I'm going to do a search for a title of jazz. And if I just do that as a title and I hit enter or click OK, it's going to tell me I have too many records for my search. The title of jazz brings up thousands and thousands of records. So I do need to narrow that down a little bit. So I'm going to say OK. So it brings me back to my search box. I'm going to narrow it down to, I just want sound recordings, and I just want CDs, audio, and I only want ones with a publisher of Sony. So I'm going to say OK. Now it says no records found. Oh, I know why. Because I had the wrong index here. I want publisher rather than publisher number. All right, so now I've still got groups because there were still many, many, many records that that met that criteria. They had a title of jazz, they had a publisher of Sony, they were a sound recording, and they were a CD audio. This one that has a couple of records in it that are books, that's probably a book that has an accompanying CD. So I'm not sure what date range I want to look at, so I'm going to look at this one that's 1992 to 1994. So I can open up that group, and within the group, I can do like we did with the other records we were looking at. I can open up the record, I can hit the F9 or the icon to move forward in that list, or I can move up and down in the list. I can go down on my list here and just double click on a record to open it. But let's say I've looked through all the records in this list that I think might match, but I don't think they're right. So I want to look at the record in the next group of records. So to do that, I can go to, well, and I have an icon here in my toolbar now that says next group. So before, the icon I clicked was to go to the next record in the group. Now I want to go to the next group. So this group I'm looking at now has 93 records in it. If I click my icon to go to the next group, then that group had 100 records in it, and I'm only on, so I've highlighted the first one. So that was the next group. It was a different range of dates. So if I need to move back and forth between a group, I can do that with this icon and then go into my records and move forward and back as I need to there. All right. Okay, let's go and do one more search. So again, I don't have to go all the way back to this main screen. I can just bring up my search box from anywhere, and I just did it by hitting the F2, but you can use the icon. You can go to cataloging and search WorldCat. So we're going to do a search for the DVD of the movie Walk in the Woods that starred Robert Redford and was published by a company called Broad Green. So I'm going to do my title. And I'm going to do, and you can put in the whole name, you know, I could do Redford, comma, Robert if I wanted to. And then I'm going to choose personal name in my list. And my publisher is Broad Green. So this is the video I'm looking for. So it's visual materials. And I'm looking for a DVD. And I don't care about the date really. So let's say, I don't want to get, I just want DVDs. I don't want any kind of streaming video or anything like that. So I'm going to say not internet. And I'm going to say okay. So that brings me up 8 records. And I can't really see anything about them other than they meet my search criteria for my title. They meet my search criteria for my publisher. They all have the same publication date. So I need to choose one of these to see if they match my piece that I'm cataloging. So in order to see a little bit more about these records without having to open them up and look at each one, I can go up here to view and I can go to list type. And the type that we're in right now is the truncated list, but I can change that to the brief list. So now I'm seeing a little more information about each one of these records, and maybe I can narrow it down to which ones I want to look for. Usually, when I have a choice between records like this, I'll start with and they look fairly similar. I'll usually start with the one that has the most holdings. Because generally, and not always, certainly not always, generally those are ones that are maybe a little better cataloging, a little fuller, might have a little more information in them. So if I was looking at this list, I probably would go for first for this one with the 30 holdings, since I had the most holdings of all of them. So I'm looking at this one. I mean, there were things that there certainly would be things I would have to do to edit it, but first I want to see if it matches. And then I think, well, I'm not really sure if this one matches, but there was another record in that list that might be one that I would look at, but I want to look at these 2 records side by side. So we're going to do something called pinning. So pinning just keeps a record open so that you can have other records open at the same time. Normally, if you have one record open and then you do something in another record, it closes the first record you were looking at. In order to keep that record open, you need to pin it. So I'm going to go up to View and Pinned. So now I see here, this record is pinned, meaning it's open. So this takes a little bit of manipulation, but we'll be able to get a couple of records up side by side to look at. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Window and Tile Vertically. So now I'm seeing the record I have open, and I'm seeing my results list. The other record that I want to look at is this one right above it that has 17 holdings. So I'm going to open that one. And I don't need to pin it. I just want it open. And now I'm going to go back and do my tile vertically again. But now I can get rid of my results list. And then I can just resize these so that they each take up half the screen. And I just kind of keep working with them until I get them where I want them. And now I can just go down field by field and I can compare each record and see what's in them, to see which record I might like better. It's possible they're duplicates. So that's a way of looking at two records side by side. And also, let's say you've got a record that you're working on and you find another record that doesn't match in every way, but it's got some really good subject headings in it. Then you can copy and paste from one record to another. So if I wanted to copy these subject headings from this record and put them into this record, I could do that here where I have these two pinned. So that's pinning. It's a little bit convoluted, takes a little bit of manipulation, but it is a good way of being able to look at two records side by side. You can also tile them horizontally, so they're one on top of the other, which I don't find useful at all, or you can cascade them. But I think in order to see them better, vertically is the better way to go. And then when I'm done, I just close. And actually this record that's pinned, I can just close it and that will unpin it. Or I can go to View and Pinned again, and that unpins it and closes it for me. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Well, actually, before I stop sharing, are there any questions about that? That's really kind of a really broad overview of searching. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. So no other questions? So the next part we're going to do is going to do some editing of records, and we have some examples that we're going to go through. Again, it's a little bit early to take a break, so we will keep going till about 11 and then we'll take another break. All right, so I am going to share my screen again. And we're back to our opening screen. So we're going to do some searching for a record, and when we find a record, we're going to see if there's any edits that we need to make to that record. So the first one we're going to do is the one called Zen in the Age of Anxiety. There was a handout posted in L2 with some scans. It had the front cover, it had some of the back cover, had the title page and the title page verso. So the first thing we're going to do is search and see if we can find a matching record. So I'm going to bring up, oops. Bring up my search box. Actually, I could have done this at my quick search box up here, but since I have the search box open, I'll do a command line search for the ISBN. I don't have a scanner, so I'm just going to type it. So I can hit enter or click OK. So that brings me up to 3 records. So if you've got the handout, and you're looking at these records, which one would you look at first? I mean, they look similar, but which one would you look at first to see whether it's a match to your item? You can either put something in the chat or you can unmute. So probably, if these were exactly the same, I would look at this one that has the 269 holdings. But if I look at my book and I look at these two records, this one says it has 170 pages and this one says it has 184 pages. And my book only has 170. So I'm going to look at this one with 170 pages. It happens to have 269 holdings, but that's not really the big consideration here, is because there's such a difference in pages. I need to go to the one that has the correct number based on my book. So I would do the rest of my matching. I would look and see that based on my title page, my title is a match, my subtitle is a match. I've got my statement of responsibility, my author and my editor. I've got first edition. That matches. I've got my place of publication. I've got my publisher. And I know it's kind of hard to read on your handout, but there is a date of publication of 2018. So I've got that. I've got my 170 pages. The information that we gave you on the handout doesn't show that little segment of preliminary pages, but we do have that. And then my size, if I had my ruler and I would measure this and I would see that it's 22 centimeters. So I would say this record is a match, but before I bring it into Polaris, I want to make sure that if I need to do any edits. So when I do my editing, I usually edit the variable fields first if they need it, and then I come up and edit the fixed fields. And that's really completely up to you. Some people do the fixed fields first and then the variable field. Some people go back and forth. If they do something in the variable field that needs to be changed up here, then they go up to the fixed field. That's totally up to you, what's most comfortable in your workflow. But I'm going to do the variable fields first because that's usually how I do it in mine. So, I know my ISBN is okay. Usually I will, when you've got a qualifier in a subfield Q on your 13-digit version of the ISBN, it's a really good idea to also put it along in the 020 with the 10-digit version. And just like a Word program or Windows, I can just copy and paste this. So I can right click and copy, or I can do the Control-C and copy, and then I can come down here and I can paste it in and use the Control-V. Then if I look down, I think my Dewey number looks okay. My author is here. So when you see in OCLC and you're looking at a record and you've got a name or a subject or a series that has this underline, that's means that heading is linked to an authority record in the authority file. So anytime you have this blue underline, that means that heading has been what's called controlled. And that means that it's linked to an authority record. Then I have my title. So there's really nothing I need to do here. So this is really kind of cataloger's judgment about whether you would put in a variant title for just this subtitle portion of the title. You don't always have to do that, but if you thought that this was something that could kind of stand alone as a title and that somebody might search by that, it's a good idea to put in a variant title field for just that part of the title. So I'm going to do that. So to add in a new field, I need to add a blank line. So I can either do that, I can have my cursor on the line above where I want to put that blank line in and hit enter, or I can have my cursor below where I want to put in a blank line and hit shift enter, and that will put in the line above. Either way. So when we do this, I'm going to do, so normally the field that you use for a variant title is a 246. But I'm going to do something deliberately wrong here just to show you what happens in the validation process. So I'm going to put this in. I'm going to just type it as a mistake and put it in as a 245. My indicators are going to be a 3 and a 0. And I'm going to put in my title from my subtitle, and I'm going to copy it and then paste it in. So I have to capitalize my first word. Oops. So I've put in my my variant title, and again, I've put it in wrong, but just to show you what happens when you do validation. First edition is fine. My 264 of my publisher, place of publication, my publisher, and my publication date. Does anybody know what I need to do with my ending punctuation here in this 264? What that should be? Got pretty much one or two choices. All right, so since I have an actual publication date, I can just end this 264 with a period. Then, so that's all I need to do here. My 300 is my physical description. So it's got my number of pages. I don't have any illustrations. It's 22 centimeters. I don't have any ending punctuation here, and I don't need any in this case because we don't have a series field in this record. So I have my 33x fields. Then I have a note field that says includes index. But looking at the information on our handout, this book also has a bibliography. So we need to put that in as well. When we have both a bibliography and an index, we combine those two into one note. But instead of a 500, it goes in a 504. So I'm going to click in here and change my 500 to 504. And then there is some standard wording that we use. Includes, bibliographical references. And since they're all together in one place in the book, I'm going to list my page numbers in parentheses and index. So now we've got our notes are combined. We've got it in our 504 instead of the 500. So our 505 is just our chapter titles, and that's fine. It's just a table of contents. In our 520, if you notice, we've got a couple of places here where we've got the wrong punctuation. We should have an apostrophe instead of this question mark. This happens a lot of times when you copy and paste a summary out of a website into OCLC, it will often paste in with the characters incorrect. So you want to, if you come across that, you want to make sure that you would correct that before you bring the record into Polaris. So these should be apostrophes rather than question marks. So you want to be careful if you're bringing in, if you're copying summaries from a website. And in my source here, I need to change that to a capital. So then I have my subject headings and they look fine. I've got some subject headings that we would not use in Polaris. We don't take them out of the OCLC record, but for Polaris, we would delete them before we would bring this record into Polaris. So in OCLC, so there are edits that you do in OCLC to the OCLC record, and there are edits that you do that are just local practices for Polaris. So you have to kind of get used to the difference between those. You can do all your local edits in OCLC before you bring the record in, or you can wait and do your local edits after you bring the record into Polaris. That's up to you how you set up your workflow. All right, so if we were going to bring this record into Polaris, we would take out these 3 fields. And the way that we take them out, the way that you can delete a field is with the Alt and Delete key on your keyboard. So if I do an Alt and a Delete, that takes out the field completely. I can also move fields up and down. So if I thought that anxiety, religious aspects, and Buddhism should be my first subject heading, I can move that one up. If I do my Alt and my up arrow, that moves my line up 1 line at a time, or I can move it back down. All right, so we need to, after we look at our variable fields, what I do is come up and I look at my fixed fields to see if there's anything that I need to edit. And so these look right. Type A for a book, encoding level is blank. That's the new encoding level that we're using for full level records. Source is something that's system supplied. I don't need to put anything in audience. If it's just a general adult level book, then I don't need to put anything in here. Control is another one that's system supplied. The language of my piece is English. So that's the code for that. My bib level, it's just a single monograph. It's not a serial. Form, there are certain times that we would code this fixed field. But this case, there's no code that applies to what we have. If I weren't sure though, I could see what codes are valid for this fixed field. I could click on form. This takes me to bibliographic formats and standards for this fixed field of form, and it gives me all of my valid codes. So I would look and see if any of these were appropriate to my work. So for books, these are the fields, these are the codes that are appropriate. So none of these things apply to what I have. This isn't Braille, it's not large print, it's not microfilm, it's not an online book. So none of these codes apply. So it's correct that that form field be blank. It's not a conference publication, so that's a 0. It doesn't have any biographical information in it, so there's no code in here. This MREC code is system supplied. This country code is a geographic code based on whatever place is in your 264 subfield A as your place of publication. So this is the code for Colorado. So under my contents fixed field though, down here, we added this note that said we had bibliographical references. So now I need to put a code up here that says we have a bibliography. So if I don't know what the code is, I click on that link. I go to the fixed fields, description in OCLC bibliographic formats and standards, and I look and see what is appropriate for my record. So you'll notice that that code B is for bibliographies. All or part of an item is a bibliography. So we need to put code B in our fixed field. So this is where if you enable that setting in your customization, you can get a drop-down menu of all the codes that are valid for a particular field. It's just not going to tell you what that code means. It's just going to give you a list of codes. So it's not a government publication. It is nonfiction. We do have an index, so it's got one in here. So our description, this record conforms to RDA standards, and it does have ISBD punctuation in it, so this code I is correct. We don't have anything in our illustrations fixed field because we don't have illustrations. There's nothing in our 300 that talks about illustrations, so we don't code anything here. This is not a fetch so that's a 0. Our date status code is S for a single date because we only have our publication date. And then our date in the date 1 field is 2018 and our date 2 field is blank. So that would be all the edits we would need to make. If we were going to export this record, we would just hit the export icon if I had that on my icon toolbar. But first, let's do our validate. So to do that, I've got an icon on my toolbar to validate, or I can go up to the menu, edit, and validate. So I deliberately made a mistake in this record. So 245 occurs too many times. So you can only have one 245 in any bib record. So it's given me that as a error message. And then it says 245 occurrence 2, meaning the second one that I put in, that the first indicator is invalid because I used an indicator that I would use for the 246 field, but that indicator is not valid for a 245. So if I close this and I go here and I change this to a 246 instead of a 245, and well, before I do that, you'll see down here on my status bar where I've got validate, I got an F because it failed validation. It found some errors, but if and this time I'm just going to click the icon. If I validate it again, and this time it didn't find any errors, now I have a C down here. So you don't always have to do this manually. I just wanted to show you what kind of errors you might see. Connexion is going to automatically validate a record when you go to export it, or when you, like if you create a new original record and you go to save it as a final record, it's going to validate it then. So that validation does happen automatically, or if you do actually edit an existing OCLC record and save changes, then it will validate it also at that time. So you don't have to do this manually, but just so you can see what kind of errors you might get. So if we were going to export this record, then if I had this icon on my toolbar, I could just hit the icon. Usually I just use the function key, which is F5, or you can go to, I think it's action and export. And if you export it and it exports correctly, then down here on your status bar, you'll see a C. I'm not going to do that. We're not saving any of these changes to the record. We're not really exporting this, but just to show you that that's what would happen. Okay, so I'm going to close this. And because I'd made some changes, it's asking me if I might want to save this, and I don't. So I'm just going to say close. And we're going to look at our next example. And that is a book called Undercover Agents. So maybe we'll do, after we do that one, then we'll take a break. So I'm going to bring up my search box again. I'm hitting the F2 this time. So I want to search for my book, Undercover Agents. And we gave you a handout in L2, gave you the title page verso, back cover. There's also a sheet with some edits. And we're going to follow along and do those edits when we find a record that matches. So this time, instead of searching by ISBN, which we know we can do, I'm going to search this by title. And I'm going to narrow it down to the author's name, which is Thomas. And I'm going to say OK. So I came up with 5 records. And if we look at these first 3, they must have a title in them somewhere of Undercover Agents, and they have an author with the name of Thomas. So those three came up, but we know they don't match what we have. Two of them are electronic. One is a completely different book. So we've got two here that might be ones that we want to do. So we would look at them and we would see, if we look at them briefly, just from here, only this fifth one has the right publisher. Number 4, same number of pages, same size, same author, same title, but a totally different publisher, different date of publication. So we know that one's not a match. So we have to look at this one. We can't automatically say this is a match. We still have to look. So we've got our ISBN. If we looked on our, I don't know if I even gave you that, on our back cover, we have our ISBN. We didn't search by that, so we want to see if that's a match. So that is, so our ISBN is a match. We've got our title from our title page. We've got our statement of responsibility, or by Paul Thomas. We've got our publisher, place of publications, Austin, Texas. We've got our publisher, and we've got, in this case, we did not have a publication date, so we're using a copyright date. But that does match the date that we have in our book. Then we have our 48 pages. I don't know that we gave you that, but we do have 48 pages. Our book does have illustrations. Some of those illustrations are color, and then our size is 24 centimeters. So this is the record, but we do need to make some edits before we can bring this into Polaris. So first thing that we notice is that this record is not an RDA record. You can tell that in a couple different ways. Up here in our description fixed field, it's got a code of an A. And then down here in our 040, if this were an RDA record, it would have a subfield E with lowercase RDA. So this record was created under the older guidelines of AACR. And AACR is still a valid set of guidelines, but for Polaris, we need to change this record to RDA. So several things we're going to need to do that. And again, I'm going to edit the variable fields first and then go up to the fixed fields. But when you are working in Connexion, whatever order you do that in is perfectly fine. So one thing I need to do, because this is when we're done, this record is going to be upgraded to RDA standards, is I need to add that subfield E. So subfield E in the 040 goes in between the subfield B and the subfield C. So I need to add that. So at the end of my subfield B, I'm going to put in a space. And then I need to put in this little delimiter symbol to tell the computer that this is a subfield. And the way that you do that is on the keyboard, you do a Control D. So that puts in my little symbol. My subfield is an E, and my code for the subfield is RDA. So everything down to here looks fine. Down in our 100. For RDA, we need to add what's called a relationship designator. It's a subfield that has a term in it that tells the relationship between this name and the work. So we have to put in a subfield to say that this Thomas, Paul, 1955, his relationship to this work is that he is the author. So we need to add a subfield E, which isn't the same as the subfield E up here. It's a subfield E to put in this relationship term, relationship designator. In order to do that, we can't edit this record when it's linked to or can't edit this field when it's linked to the authority record. So we have to do what's called uncontrol to unlink that record. So if we do a shift F11, oops, sorry, Control F11, that unlinks. So now we can edit this field. So at the end, after the date, we do our control D and an E, and our relationship designator term is author. So now I'm going to recontrol this heading, and again, controlling headings is something you'll learn about in other classes. So I'm just going to do this, and what this does is automatically links this name back to the authority record. But you'll learn about that in the authority records class, and you'll learn about that in your online modules, about what controlling is, what authority records are. Okay, looking at our 245, we're fine. It's nothing that we need to change here. Then we get down to our publication information, where we have our place of publication, our publisher, and our copyright date. So 260 is a mark tag that we no longer use in RDA records. The tag that we use now for RDA is a 264. So I need to change this from a 260 to a 264. And when I have a 264, I need to have a particular second indicator to show, and that second indicator is going to show that this is publication information. But if I don't know what that indicator should be, I can go to bibliographic and formats and standards and look at the examples. So to do that right from here, if I right click anywhere in this field, and I go to Mark Field Help, and that brings up the entry for my 264. And we're not worried about the first indicator position because we don't need that. That's blank for this particular record. In our second indicator position, we have 5 choices. The one that we want is second indicator 1, because what we have in here is publication date. So if I go back, so now I want to put a 1 in my second indicator position. Then for RDA, we would not abbreviate the name of this state. Since it's spelled out on the title page, we would spell it out. So I'm just going to add Texas spelled out. We would put the entire name of the publisher instead of just the Raintree Steck Vaughn. So I would put Raintree Steck Vaughn Publishers. And I would also put the little part underneath it that says a Steck Vaughn company, but just in the interest of time, I'm not going to do all that typing. But then under RDA, even we don't have a publication date. We are using our copyright date to match on, and that is the same date as what we have. Then we have to use our copyright date as what's called an implied publication date. But we can't just list it by itself. We have to put it in square brackets. So I'm going to take out this symbol, and I'm going to just put my date in square brackets, and then I take out the period at the end. But I want to go ahead and add an additional 264 field to show my copyright date, so that if somebody is looking at this, they'll know that that 1998 date in brackets came from that copyright date. So before, I had my cursor in the line above where I wanted my blank line to be, and I hit enter, and that puts a blank line below. If I happen to have my cursor in the 300, I can put in my blank line above by doing a shift enter. So either way, enter or shift enter, depending on where your cursor is. So the tag that I want to put in is a 264. I don't remember what my second indicator is supposed to be, so I'm going to go back and look at my bibliographic formats and standards, and I look at my choices of second indicators, and second indicator 4 is copyright notice date, so that's what I'm going to use. Indicator 4, it's a subfield C, so I have to put in that delimiter symbol, and I do that with a control D and a C. So You'll notice that at the beginning of each one of these lines, you don't see any subfields. That means that the line is beginning with a subfield A. In OCLC, subfield A is understood. At the beginning of a line, if you don't see that, the actual subfield, delimiter symbol and subfield, then that means it's subfield A. Polaris doesn't do that. You actually see the subfield A at the beginning of the line, but in OCLC, you don't. But if your line begins with something other than subfield A, then you do have to put that in. So for this, our line begins with, we have to use subfield C to put our copyright date in. So I had to put that at the beginning of the line. So then I put in a space. So now I need to put in my 1998, but I need to actually put in that copyright symbol. And to do that, I go up to a couple different ways, but I have this icon on my toolbar, this icon that says ALA. Click on that and it opens up a table. And the symbol that I want is the copyright symbol. So if I find that in my table and I highlight it and I click insert and close, and then that puts that little copyright symbol in there. And then I put my date. Okay, so we're good down through our publication. Let's see what else we need to do. Our 300 looks fine. So we have a period at the end of our 300 in this record that we didn't have in the first record that we looked at. It's because we have a series statement down here in a 490. But everything is spelled out, so that looks good. We've got our 3x fields. We've got our series. We've got the 500 note that says our book includes an index, which it does. It does not have a bibliography. It only has an index. So that's okay to leave it in the 500. We've got a summary. We've got our statement or our table of contents. We've got some subject headings down here. Again, there are some of these that we would not keep. If we were going to bring this record into Polaris, we would delete these headings, but we're not going to export this record, so I'm not going to take any of those out. So the next thing I'm going to do is go up and look at my fixed fields. So my type A is okay, my encoding level is okay, my source. So I've got an audience code of C, which I think is like pre-adolescent, or it's a certain audience level, and that's fine. If there's a certain level that a particular work goes with, you can put that code in there. If it was just or I could just do a J for a general juvenile work. My book is in English, so that's what we've got here. That's the code. It is a monograph. There wasn't anything. It's not Braille. It's not large print, so there's nothing else. Nothing we need to put in there. It's not a conference. Our biography or biographical information fixed field has a code C in it because there is some biographical information in here about each of these people. So we've got a C in there for a collective biography. This MREC field is system supplied. So we've got a code in our country fixed field of NJU. The code in the country fixed field is supposed to correspond with the place that's listed in our 264 subfield A. This code happens to be for New Jersey. The code that we need is for Texas. So if I don't know what code to use for Texas, I click on country. That takes me to the entry for this fixed field in the OCLC bibliographic formats and standards. And in there is a link to the codes. So we want to go to this mark code list for countries. And that takes us to a whole nother website. And we're going to do, this is a list of the codes. If we click on name sequence and we click on T, and we just scroll down until we find Texas, then our code is TXU. So sometimes you won't find what you need actually in the bibliographic formats and standards, but it generally will give you a link to where you need to go. So instead of and JU, we need a TXU. So we did not have a bibliography in this book, so our contents field is blank. It's not a government publication. It is nonfiction, so a code of 0 is correct. It does have an index, so we put a code in there. So in our description fix field, this code A means a record that is an AACR record. Our record is now, it now conforms to RDA standards. So I'm going to change this code to an I. So the I means it conforms to RDA standards and it includes ISBD punctuation. This book is not a festschrift, so that's a 0. So now we have our date status code is an S, because originally we only had the copyright date reflected in our record. Right now we've got a publication date and we have a copyright date. Even though those happen to be the same dates, we have both. We have a publication date and a copyright date. So now we need to change our code here to a T, and we need to fill in both dates. And as it happens, both dates are going to be the same. All right, so I think that's all we would need to do. Again, if we were going to export this record to Polaris, we would take out these subject headings that we don't use. But I'm not going to export this, but if I did, I would see a little C down here in the export to say that it exported correctly. All right, any questions about that one? Okay, we are going to go ahead and take another little break, maybe I'd say another 5 minutes, just to get up and stretch a little. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right, then we're going to continue with editing. I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, one thing I did want to show you, since we've got this undercover agents record up still, is let's say you were doing some editing and you weren't able to finish. So there's a way that you can save the record so that you can come back to it later. So to do that, we go to Action and Save Record. So it gives you two choices, Save Record to Online File or Save Record to Local File. Generally, you want to save it to the online file. If you save it to the online file, you can go to any computer that has OCLC and you can put in your authorization and you can get to that file if you wanted to work on that record. If you save it to the local file, it's only going to be saved to the computer where that you were working on when you saved it. So generally, it's good to save it to the online file. So if I click that, and then it assigns it a number. In my case, it put it into online file number 33. So I say, okay, and then I close my record and, you know, I have other things. I had a phone call or something. So now, if I want to go back to that record in the file, then I can go up here to cataloging and search. Since I saved it in the online save file, that's where I would click. If I saved it in the local save file, I would click there. So I saved it in the online save file. So here I could just type in my number. So I knew it was record number 33. I could just type that in. If I didn't remember what number it had been assigned, if I just hit enter here, it brings up a list of everything I have in my save file. And then here's my record in number 33. So if you're working on a record and you can't finish it, then you can put it in the save file and come back to it later. Okay, so we're going to go on and
There was a question in the chat and I answered it, but you may want to mention it.
Oh, how can we view the recorded videos at a later date? Is that the one? So we will be posting those on in the share website on the training portal. There's going to be a section there for all of the classes that are in the series that we do for people who are new catalogers or want to become new catalogers and share. But anybody can get in there and look at the recordings. So they will all be there. It'll probably be a few days before we get this one in there, but that's where it will be. Okay. So the third example we're going to look at is a book called A Blue Seed. And we gave you a handout. It was just one page. It has the title page and then some written information. So I'm not going to go through the whole searching process for this one. We're going to just pull up the record by the record number. So if I go to, you can either click my icon, I can hit my F2. There. So I can go up here to my command line, or I could have done it up here in my quick search box. I just have to do one of those three prefixes to pull up just a record number. I'm going to use the hash mark. And this record is the one that's written on the corner of your handout. So I know this is the record I want to use, but as you can see, this record needs a lot of edits before it would conform to the standards that we would use in Polaris. So we're going to, again, I'm going to do the fixed fields first, then the variable fields. So this is not an RDA record. It has nothing up here in the description fixed field. It doesn't have the subfield E to show that it's RDA. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to add that subfield E. So to make that delimiter symbol, I do a Control D, and then the subfield is E, and then the code is RDA, all lowercase. And then when I come up and do the fixed fields, then I will put the code in here for a description. So we've got our author down here in the 100. And we need to put on our subfield E for our relationship designator term. So to put a comma, in this case, at the end of the author's name, you don't always do that, but in this case I do. I have to put in my subfield with my delimiter, and then the subfield is an E, and the term is author. So this record is pretty old. You can tell up here when it was originally entered. Back in 1974 is when this record was originally created. So AACR, weren't even using AACR, we certainly weren't using RDA. So it's missing a lot of the things that we use, a lot of the punctuation. So we're going to have to fill in some things here. So my 245, my indicators are correct. My title is correct, a blue seed, but this period at the end is not correct. So I need a slash between my title in the subfield A and my statement of responsibility in the subfield C. So I just put in my slash and I take out that period. So my subfield C is my statement of responsibility. So I need to add in my author's name. All it's got in there is my illustrator, but in my title page, I have my author and an illustrator. So I need to add in my author's name. And then I need to put in a space, semicolon, space to separate my two functions, my author and my illustrator. And I need to make my illustrator lowercase instead of uppercase I. So now that's correct based on what's on my title page. In my 250, I do have an edition statement on my title page, this First American edition. But again, under the older rules, under ACR, we abbreviated a lot of things. Under RDA, we abbreviate hardly anything. So based on what's on my book, first is spelled out instead of the ordinal number. Oops, put it in the wrong place. So instead of the 1ST, I'm going to put in first because that's what's on my book, American, and then edition, since it's spelled out on my book. So that's correct there. I need to change, like we did on the last record that we looked at, I need to change my 260 to a 264. So I'm going to do that. This is publication information. So it's a second indicator of a 1, but if I didn't remember that, I would right click and go to Mark Field Help, and I would find the correct indicator. My correct punctuation between my subfield A or before my subfield B is a colon. So in between my place of publication and my publisher, in my subfield B, I have a colon. My comma at the end of Hastings House is correct. My subfield C, I have both a publication date and a copyright date listed here. Under ACR, that would have been correct. Under RDA, we would put our copyright date in a separate 264 line. So I need to add my blank line. This is a 264. In this case, my second indicator is a 4 because this is a copyright date. I need my subfield C, so I do my Control D to put in my delimiter symbol. The subfield is a C, and then a space, and then I could go up to that chart and put in the diacritics for the copyright symbol, or I can just copy this. Oops. So I'm going to do my Control X because that just cuts it out, and then Control V to copy it back down here. And then my ending punctuation up here, in this case, in my 264, second indicator 1, is a period. Looking at my 300 line, my number of pages is correct, and it is spelled out like we would do for RDA. My color illustrations is spelled out, but I don't have the correct punctuation in between. So I need my colon before my subfield B. And then I need a semicolon before my subfield C. Then my dimensions, my 20 by 27 centimeters, that's correct based on what we have. I have my 336, 337, and 338 fields that are required in every RDA record. You'll have those fields. We have our 520, which is our summary. We only have a subject heading for fantasy, and really we need to add some subject headings in here. So on your handout, we had subjects for magic and for airplanes. So I'm going to add 2 blank lines to put in these subject headings, but I'm going to add them in different places in the record just to show you the reformatting function. So my cursor is here. I want to add in the subject heading. Rather than go all the way down here to where the other 650s are, I'm just going to hit my blank line here, hit enter. I'm going to go ahead and put in the subject heading line right here. So it's a 650. My first indicator is blank. My second indicator is 0. My subfield A, although you don't see it, my subfield A is magic. Then I need to add a subdivision. So I do my Control D. In this case, it's a subfield V for juvenile fiction to show that this is a juvenile level work. And then let's say I'm going to go here and I'm going to hit another blank line. And then I'm going to put in my airplanes. And I'm just going to copy and paste my subdivision. So the only reason I'm putting these fields in here in the wrong spot in the record is to show you the function called reformatting. So up here on your menu bar or your toolbar, there's a icon, looks like an R, if you have that icon. And it's called Edit Reformat, or you can go to Edit on the menu bar and Reformat. And what that does is you'll notice now my two subject headings are lined up in the right spot. It's lined up where in the area of the record where the subject headings go. So it really doesn't matter, you know, where you add a line into a record, it's going to reformat and put it in the right place. So again, just like with the validation, you don't have to manually do that reformatting. It's automatically going to reformat when you save the record or when you export the record, or if you create a new record. But just so you can see, because sometimes things get kind of mixed up when you're doing editing. So if you want to go in, you know, and you're in the middle of editing and you just want to make sure everything lines up in the right spot, then hit that reformat icon, and that moves everything around to where it should be. All right, let's see. So we have our subject headings. So we have a subject heading of fantasy, which actually should not be a subject heading. It should be a genre heading. So I'm going to uncontrol that with my control F11. So that just means it's unlinked from the authority record. And I'm just going to correct the coding. And you'll learn about genre headings and subject headings and what the difference is. You'll learn about that in the Library of Congress subject headings class. All right, so down here in our 700, we need to put in our relationship designator in our subfield E. We use that in our 100 field. We also do that in the 700 field. Again, this is telling us the relationship between this name and this work. And the relationship is that this name is the illustrator. So I have to do that control F11 in order to be able to edit this field. And then I have to put in my control D for my subfield. And the subfield itself is E, and the term is illustrator. You might notice that this name in the 700 is different than this name in the 245 subfield C. That is something that we will talk about in the authority records class, is that sometimes the name that's established in the authority record for that person is not necessarily the name, the same way as they use that name on the piece. So it's not that this is wrong. It just has to do with how the authority record was set up. And again, we'll talk about that in the authority records class. You'll learn all about that. All right, any questions about that one? Oh, there's not, we still have to finish. Sorry, we're not done. So we've brought it up to RDA standards down in the variable fields, but we need to come up and look at our fixed fields. Our encoding level is an M, and an M encoding level just means a record that was loaded by a batch process. For what we do for full level coding in Polaris records is we use blank. So we would delete that out. We've got, I'm not going to look at every single one of these. We've got an audience level of a J, which is correct. That's just a general code that means that this is a juvenile level work. It's a work in English. It's a monograph. It's not Braille or large print or any of those things that we would need to code here. It's not a conference publication. It's not a biography. Our country code is NYU, which stands for New York, and that does match what we have down in our 264 subfield A, so that's correct. We don't have a bibliography or anything else that we would need to code in the contents fixed field, so that's fine. It's not a government publication. It is fiction, so instead of the 0 that we saw on those first 2 records that we looked at, we've got a 1 here that shows that this is a work of fiction. There are some other codes for other choices for poetry or essays or short stories. So if you wanted to, if you weren't sure of a code, then you could go to, click on that link. It would take you to the bibliographic formats and standards and give you the codes and what they mean. It does not have an index. So in our description, again, we need to put in that code I, which means that it conforms to RDA standards, and it has ISBD punctuation, which is where we put in our colon and our semicolon and our slash here. That's all ISBD punctuation. We do have illustrations, so we have a code A in our illustrations fixed field. If we had, besides just general illustrations, we had like maps and portraits or charts or genealogical tables, there are other codes that we could also put in here. We can put up to 4. It's not a festschrift. So in our date status, we've got a code S for a single date of 1967. But down here in our 264, we do have a publication date and we have a copyright date. So we need to put both of those up here in our fixed field. So in this case, our code is a T, meaning we have both a publication and a copyright date. In this case, they're actually different. So our first position, our date 1 position is 1967, and then our date 2 position is our copyright, which was 1965. So this is what we would do as far as editing for this record. Our next step would be, well, there are some subject headings here that we do not use in Polaris, so we would take those out. We would make sure that all the headings were controlled if they could be controlled, and you'll learn about that later as you go through the modules. And then we would export this to our flash drive and then into Polaris. All right, I'm going to do one more. Possibly 2 if we have enough time, but 1. Any questions about this one? All right. So I'm going to close this, and I've made edits and it's just asking me if I want to save this to a save file, and I'm going to say no. So I'm just going to close it. So I'm going to bring up my search box again. So this next one, we didn't give you a handout. This was kind of an example I added at the last minute yesterday, so there's really no handout for it, but you can just kind of follow along. So we're going to search. So we're searching for a book called Timberwolf Tracks. So I'm going to put in my title. And I will, just a little tip, if you search something by the title and you don't come up with something, try it again as a title phrase. Sometimes you'll get something if you search by title phrase that you don't get if you search by title, and the other way around. So, if you don't get something on the first try, try it again. If you don't get something with title, try it again as title phrase. I'm going to limit this by my author, my first author. There's actually more than one. I'm not going to limit by publisher. I'm going to limit by books, which I only want books. And this is a really old book, so the date of publication is 1946. I'm going to say okay. So it came up to 9 records. Again, this is that truncated view, and I need to see a little bit more information on this before I decide if there's a record in here that matches what I have. So I'm going to do that where I go to View and List Type and change it to the brief view. So then I can look and see. So again, like I said before, usually I would look at the record that has the most holdings, which is this one in the middle. That has 112 holdings. It's usually when it's got more holdings like that. And also you'll notice that it's got this DLC. So that means it's a record that was put in by a national level library, either the Library of Congress or one of their partnering libraries. So if I were doing this for real, that's the record I would look at first to see whether this matches what I have. But since we're just looking at doing some edits, I'm going to look at a bad record. So I'm going to go to this third one. And this is really bad. But there's some things I want to show you here. So again, I would just do all my matching, and let's just say that this is the only record that matched my book. So this is what I have to work with. So I do need to do a lot of editing on this. Again, it's not an RDA record, not even sure it's an AACR record. A lot of things in the fixed field haven't been filled in. It doesn't have anything in my description. My description says U for unknown. It's missing a lot of things. So again, we're going to go do the variable fields first, then we're going to do the fixed fields. So I need to add, I'm going to upgrade this to an RDA record. So I need to add that subfield, Control D and then E with the RDA. So just, you can hover over these codes to see what other institutions have done something to a particular record. It doesn't tell you what they've done, it just tells you that they've done something to it. So in my 100, so I didn't have an ISBN on this book. It's from 1946, before they had ISBN, so I don't have an ISBN. So I don't need to add that in here. I do have a Dewey number, so that's good. Down in my 100, I have my author's name, and I have the subfield 4 with a code. So this code is kind of the same thing as a relationship designator. We were putting in that subfield E and putting in author or illustrator. This subfield 4 with a code does the same thing, but so what's supposed to happen is if you bring this into your local catalog, your software will translate that code into the term. So this code, the CMP, stands for compiler. So if your software could do it, if you bring this into your catalog and when you display this in your pack, it would translate the subfield 4 from a CMP to compiler. Polaris doesn't do that. So our local practice is that we would change this to a subfield E instead of the subfield 4, and we would put in the relationship designator term instead of this code. For purposes of OCLC, this code is not incorrect, but for Polaris, we would change it. So I'm going to just show that, and it's okay to do that in OCLC as well. So save compiler. Then we look at our 245. So we have our Timberwolf tracks and then a comma and then the rest of the title. I would separate this. I would say Timberwolf tracks, and looking at this book, that I would call this History of the 104th Infantry Division a subtitle rather than a part of the title. So I need to put that in a subfield B instead of all part of the subfield A. So I'm going to get rid of the comma, and I'm going to put in my colon, which is what separates my subfield A and my subfield B. I'm putting in my delimiter symbol, and it's a B. Then I have history of the 104th, well, infantry and division should be capitalized, so I would do that part too. And then my two authors, or compiler, I guess, that's correct based on what's on my title page. I would need to change my 260 to a 264. Again, this is publication information, so it's a second indicator of a 1. My place is in my subfield A that you can't see. I've got my publisher in the subfield B. And then again, when I have this 1946 with a lowercase c in front of it, this was the way that we indicated a copyright in AACR and previous rules. So I need to move that to my 264 subfield, or second indicator 4. And again, my subfield is a C. I need to generate that copyright symbol. So I'm coming up to my chart, my ALA icon in my chart. I choose copyright here, highlight that, insert and close, and then my 1946. But then I need to come up here because we're using this copyright date as an implied publication date, so it has to be in square brackets. And then no ending punctuation. So then I need to, so under our new rules, we would spell out these abbreviations. RDA would not abbreviate pages, it would not abbreviate illustrations. I would need to put in my dimensions. So I would spell out portraits. And this book is 24 centimeters tall. So every record that's RDA has to have the 336, 337, and 338 field to indicate the format. And we don't have that here. So we can use a macro to add those fields in, which is much easier than putting them in manually. So I'm going to hit a blank line. And then I'm going to go up to run a macro. So I can go to Tools and Macros and Manage. And then I get a list of all of the macros that are available here. And if you open yours, you might see this OCLC collapsed with a plus sign here. And if you have that, just click that plus sign and it will open up the line. So these are all the macros that OCLC provides. So the one that we're going to use is this one called add33x. So we highlight that. We don't want to click OK. We want to click Run over here. And it tells you the description of this macro is that it adds those 33x fields. So I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to click Run. So it brings up a chart. So it already pre-fills in the fields for me based on, this is a type, record type A, which means a book. So it filled in my content type of text. It filled in my media type of unmediated. That just means there's no extra special equipment that has to be used to access this thing. It doesn't need a computer. It doesn't need any sort of a player. So it doesn't have any sort of media type that it needs. And then the carrier type, the physical form of what this thing is a volume. So it actually filled it in for me. And all I have to do is say, okay. So it's much, much easier to use the macro to put in that those 33x fields and to try and put them in yourself. You can certainly type them in manually, but you don't have to. Just the macro is much better. So I left me with a blank line here. I can either do that Alt-Delete to get rid of that line, or if I were to export or save this record, it it would get rid of that for me, but I'm going to go ahead and delete it. So then we would come down, we would put in, you know, we'd put in a little summary. We would put in, probably put in some other subject headings, and all of these other subject headings that are in here are ones that we don't use. We would leave them in for OCLC, but for Polaris, we don't use them. So, but I've got my one for United States Army Infantry History. I would probably, if I were doing this, I would probably add a few more. But just to show you some things. And then I would come down here to my other person that's listed in my statement of responsibility, and I need to put in this relationship designator to say what his role is to this work. And his relationship, apparently, if you see this code in the 4 is an EDT, that means editor. So again, for OCLC, it's okay to leave this, but for Polaris, we would change it to a subfield E instead of a 4, and we would spell out editor. So another thing we need to do that we can do with the macro is we've got a subject heading in here that has a geographical place in it of the United States. So whenever we have a subject heading that has any sort of a geographical place or a geographical subdivision, we also need to put in an additional field that puts in that geographical place in a coded form. And again, we can do that with a macro, much easier than trying to look up the code in a table. So I can go up here to Tools and Macros and Manage, and you'll notice this little icon. So I actually have this icon on my toolbar. If I click this icon, it just opens up those macros. But otherwise, I can go to Tools and Macros and Manage, and then here's my list of macros. And the one that we want this time is this generate 043. And it just tells you down here, it generates the 043 based on data in the 6XX fields. So based on geographical information in a subject heading. And if I click on run, so now it's put in the code for United States. So again, this is much easier to do with the macro. There are lots of macros. There are some that are supplied with OCLC, and there are some that if you are good about macros, and you know how to do them, you can put them in yourself or export them from other places that have macros. So lots of macros you can use. So I think we've got our variable fields correct. So then we would come up and we would do our fixed fields. So again, we don't use encode for purposes of Polaris. We would, after we have upgraded the record to a full level cataloging, we would change this encoding level to a blank. We don't need to change anything here. Our audience level is just general adult level work, so there's no real special audience code we need here. But again, you can always click on this link to take you to the bibliographic formats and standards, and it will give you the list of codes. And if you see something that's more specific that you think is appropriate for this work, you can put a code in there. We have ENG in our language code because the language of our piece is English. You'll notice down here in the 040, we also have English. That's the language of cataloging, meaning the language of the organization that put this record in. So these two things are not the same, although the code is the same in this case. Our country code is DCU, which is the code for Washington, D.C., which matches what we have in our 264 subfield A. So in our second line, we have, this is a monograph. It's not a serial or integrating resource or anything like that. We don't need anything in our form fixed field. It's not Braille, it's not large print. It's not any of the things that we would need to code. We do need to code something here in our conference fixed field. So if I click, if I don't know, there really are only two choices. You can either have a 0, meaning it's not a conference publication, or you can have a 1, meaning it is. So we just put in a 0. I don't know. This probably has some biographical information in it, but I don't have the book in my hand today, so I'm not going to code anything in there. But there is a code for, you know, if it was a biography or an autobiography, there's a code for that. Or if it just has some biographical information in it. So down on my next line, I don't have anything that says I have a big bibliography, so I'm not going to code anything in here. This is not a government publication. It's not fiction. Again, with my index, it doesn't have an index, but I need to see how I need to code that. So this is kind of like conference. You put in a 0 if there's not an index, you put in a 1 if there is. Even if there's more than one index, you just put in a 1 just to say that there is an index in this work. So we don't have one, so we put in a 0. Our description code is a 1 because now we've brought this record up to, or an I, sorry, we brought this record up to RDA standards and it has ISBD punctuation. We do have illustrations. So we've got 3 different types listed here. We've got just general illustrations, we've got maps, and we've got portraits. So we have 4 positions here that we can code for illustrations. If I click on that to see what codes are available. So A is just general illustrations. B is for maps and C is for portraits. If I had genealogical tables or facsimiles or music, there are other codes, but I just need A, B, and C. Festschrift is just like conference or index. It's either a 0 if it's not a Festschrift or a 1 if it is, and this is not. I don't think I've ever actually cataloged a Festschrift, so that's almost always a 0. And then we actually have 2 dates. We have a publication date of 1946 and a copyright date of 1946. So we need to change this to a T and put in both dates, even though they are the same. So this was one that needed a lot of help. I just wanted to show you about using the macros to add the 336, to use the macros to add your geographical codes. Again, we would add, there's other things we would add here. We would put in a summary, we'd probably put in some more subject headings. When we would bring this into Polaris, we would take out these subject headings that don't conform to our local practices. All right, any questions about any of the navigating that we've done in OCLC? Any of the, you know, how to manipulate a record? You can also do, there is a function key that will move your cursor from one part of the record to another, and I can never remember what it is, but there is on that OCLC page where the client documentation is, there is a template for function keys, so that if you'd like to use function keys, you can download that template. I'm going to go ahead and close this. We're finishing up a little bit early. There was one other example where we gave you a handout in L2. And this one is for a sound recording called October by U2. I'm going to close this. So I don't think we have time to go through all of the edits. So if you want to just pull up this record when you get a chance to get into OCLC on your own, if you want to just pull up this record and go through these edits and try them out for yourself, or if you didn't get a chance, I think we gave you the list of edits for that Undercover Agents record. Go through and make those edits just for some practice. And if you have questions about any of the searching, any of the customization that we did, if you don't find what you need in that setup worksheet that's posted on the OCLC website, you can call us or email us. I'm going to put my email in the chat. or you can email anybody on the share cataloging team. And we'd be glad to either email you back or get on Zoom with you and share our screens and look at some things together. So we've got 5 whole minutes. Does anybody have any questions or wants to look at anything? If not, Shannon, if you want to stay on, we can look at your screen. I can give you permission to share your screen and you can show me what your screen looks like and we can see.
She got it loaded. I
Oh,
sent
you did?
the link
Oh, okay.
to her.
Okay.
She also asked me a private question, and I may have answered this wrong because I know it's changed. But the question was, will the record leave the saved online file once you finish it? And I remember it used to, but then I'm thinking now they've changed that so that you have to delete things from the online save file.
I think that's right. I think if you did a brand new original record from scratch, and you had your draft record in the online file, and you then save that record to make it a final record and actually add it to OCLC, I think that one will come out of the save file. But I think if you just put something in the save file to do some edits and then you go to export it, I don't think it does. I think you do have to come in and delete it. And it's pretty easy. I'll share my screen again and show you how to delete out of the save file. So if I go to cataloging, search the online save file, and I'm just going to bring up the whole thing. So like the one I was working on today, this number 33, I can just highlight it, and you can highlight more than one and delete more than one at the same time. But I can just highlight this and then I can go to action and I can say delete record. It's not deleting the record out of OCLC or out of WorldCat. It's just deleting it out of the save file. And I'm sure you can also do it with a record that's open. You can go up to action and delete, and that does the same thing. Okay, so question is, how do we get an authorization number and password? Should we have set that up already, or did I miss that? You didn't necessarily miss it. Kara, your library is a cataloging library already. So your library has a membership in OCLC. So Teresa, well, I guess Teresa's retired, but Donna should have your authorization number. You guys probably already have OCLC loaded on some computers. And we don't keep a master list of those authorization numbers. So if you don't have one or you had one and you're not sure what it is, I can give you the point of contact at the state library who can look that up for you. Yeah, Kara says they do have OCLC on a couple of computers. So, and you can have it on more than one computer, and you can use with the same authorization on more than one computer. And I think it's okay that each person can have their own authorization if you want to. You can get in touch with the state library about getting if you each want an individual authorization, but you don't have to.
And some people don't actually remember their authorization number because they put it into the computer, or they don't remember their password
Right.
anyway.
Right. Yeah.
In there and signs in automatically when they say log in.
Yeah, that does happen too. All right. Anybody else have any questions? Shelley had put in the chat a little earlier that we will be putting this recording in the share training portal. And whenever, I'm not sure how long it takes to get in there, and it's going to be in a section with all the other cataloging classes that we use in the series for people that are training to be catalogers and share. And those are the book cataloging class, the Introduction to Authority Records, Library of Congress subject headings, and Dewey Decimal classification. So those are the 4 required classes. This class is not required. It's optional, because most of the information, probably all of the information that you get today, you're also going to get in those online modules. But this just kind of gives you an opportunity to sort of try it along with us as we present and ask questions. So we just kind of offer this one as a separate optional class. So, but those will all be together in that series in the training portal.
I got a question yesterday, and then again in a private chat today about if the name says somebody who has long retired and you're greeting, hello, Sam, and Sam doesn't work there anymore. I do have a handout that I can send to anybody who needs it for submitting that to OCLC. So you can just have it say, hello, cataloger, hello, staff, or if you want your own name there, if you're the only one that uses it at the library, you can submit that to OCLC and they'll change that. So anybody who needs that, just let me know. My email is sstone@illinoisheartland.org. I'm just putting that in.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working here, we had the name of somebody that had, not worked here in a long, long time. And that name just stayed on that, it always say, hello, Julie, I think her name was. So we had hello, Julie for however many years. Probably still says that. All right, any other questions or comments? You're welcome, Amanda. I'm glad it was helpful. All right, I am going to go ahead and end the meeting, but if you have any questions, then feel free to email me or Shelley or anybody else on the Share cataloging team. And have a great rest of the day. Now you can get up and walk around.